Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter and welcome to Recovery is Possible. And this episode of Recovery is Possible is brought to you by Retreat Behavioral Health, where there are endless possibilities for recovery. Retreat provides quality care at their leading mental health and substance use treatment centers, which are designed to offer patients truly personalized and comprehensive programs that are tailored to their needs. Retreat substance use and mental health treatment centers in Palm Beach County, Florida, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and New Haven, Connecticut do everything in their power to ensure that patients receive the highest quality treatment in a safe and comfortable setting. So reach out today at retreatbehavioralhealth.com or call at 855-802-6600 for more information. And with that, guys, I want to introduce you to somebody that met a couple of weeks ago. His name is Eric Kreitz, and he's with Renovium Leadership Coaching. And we were introduced by a former coworker of mine when I was teaching down at the FBI Academy, and I was teaching on substance use and mental health issues. And we worked together, and then I retired, this individual retired, and then years later, here we are doing references to one another. And he introduced me to Eric, and Eric has a very interesting concept when it comes to coaching. Now, we all know about coaching for the person that is suffering from addiction and mental health issues. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. But we don't really do a whole lot to do with the organizations themselves and how they treat people and sort of that connection between the person that's getting well and their employer. And that's a very interesting concept. Again, it's something that's not talked about a whole lot. I think on my level, I've been trying to do that for many years, but Erica has a very unique approach to this, and I wanted him to come on the program and talk about that. And he has a story that goes along with it because, like most of us that are in this field, there's a reason why we got into this field, and we'll hear a bit about that. But with that, I want to introduce you to Eric Kreitz. So, Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit, just to kind of give us a frame of reference, how did you, because you're an Army guy, Army officer, and I was a naval officer, and, here we both kind of came to this place, and, I have my story, and we'll probably touch on some of that a little bit, but before we get to what it is that you do now, how did you end up here?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, particularly for this forum. I think it's very important what you're doing and bringing light to some of the things that we go through as folks in recovery. But I did want to just touch a little bit on like you said, how I got here. I retired from the Army back in November of 2023, and part of my story, which I'll know we get into, is what really spurred me as far as getting into the type of coaching that I'm taking a look at. And so what I call it reintegration coaching. And what that really is whenever somebody comes back to work from a long absence, it's being mental health or addiction, and their treatment, they come back to work. And a lot of the time, the person that comes back to work has a ton of resources, whether it's from the organization or from the treatment center that they were at. But sometimes, or frankly, most of the time, I don't think folks ever talk to the people that they're coming back to, the supervisor, their colleagues, their direct reports. And so I know in my situation, when I came back, there was a lot of awkwardness and there was a lot of questioning about what could and couldn't happen. And it took about 4 months for me to kind of get normalized back into the workplace after my stint in treatment. And so what I'm really trying to take a look at is how do we close that window of awkwardness, and how do we help the team that reintegrated person is coming back to become more productive sooner, so that the person that's coming back feels supported, and the manager and the supervisors and the colleagues and the direct reports also feel supported in that process, so we can get that team up and running more productive than they were before the person left.
Yeah, and that's really important because I know for those of you that are familiar with my story, that I got into recovery while in the FBI, and I went off to treatment, and I can tell you firsthand that, wow, they had no idea how to handle this situation. In the FBI, they're very, very good about disciplining people, and that's kind of like the hammer that they use to discipline people for getting into recovery. And I'm going to clarify this here a little bit too. If you are So if you have an addiction issue and while you're at work, oftentimes, people do things and have things happen to them that require discipline. That can be getting a DUI, showing up to work drunk or high, or any number of issues where you can get into trouble. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be disciplined for that. They absolutely should. But what about so in the FBI, I know but it was a one-size-fits-all. We know how to treat people that have gotten into trouble due to their drinking and drugging. But what about the people that come forward to get help where there was no disciplinary issues? And this was, the case the situation that I was in. You raise your hand, you say, hey, look, I have a problem. I want to go to treatment. I want to get help. And then you come back. And I know in my case, they kind of treated it like you were in trouble. They like you were a discipline problem. And, you have a disease. You have, you went to a hospital. You went to a medical facility to get well, and then when you come back, you're treated like a pariah. You're treated like you did something horrible when you didn't, because that's how they treat the people that actually get into trouble. And I always thought that there was this disconnect between those two approaches. It's like, why are you treating me poorly when I asked for help to get for help for my disease? You should come alongside me and support me. And I never felt that way. Never, ever felt that way when I came in. And I think that it's important to do so, because if you're a manager, if you are somebody that's managing other people and they fall into this category and they come in and they're trying to get help and they're trying to work and they're trying to get into long-term sobriety, my take on that is that if you're not careful, you can do a lot more damage than good. And so, Eric, when I heard your story and I heard the work you were doing, I thought that was exactly what we needed back then. And, so maybe get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And that was kind of my experience as well, which was the good part of it. I had a phenomenal supervisor. I had a phenomenal team around me, and they worked really hard to bring me back into the fold and give me purpose and make me feel supported. But I did have little experiences along the way. For example, we went out to our first team luncheon after I got back from treatment, and guys were hiding their beer behind their menus like I was going to jump the table and grab it. And I said, come on, guys, you don't have to do that. And they said, well, nobody talked to us and nobody told us. We didn't know what to expect. And so we're doing what we think is right. And I think that's what happens a lot of the time, is people just do what they think is right. When they're bringing somebody back in onto the team. And, when I was an outpatient, I saw a really wide spectrum of experiences. And I think mine was one of the better ones. Just like you described, people are trying to bring you back in, and they're trying to do their best. But in some instances, people didn't know what to do until they treated that person like a pariah, because it was a little bit safer, I think, emotionally for them to do that. And if they could just kind of put them to the side and bring in a replacement for that person, they wouldn't have to worry about that reintegrated person. I saw experiences where, in the military, where supervisors were trying to get soldiers off of their books quickly so that they could get a replacement, and that didn't have to take time to go to treatment or outpatient or whatever the prescribed course of action was for that person. And so they felt like a pariah because their supervisors just didn't know. And so what I'm trying to do is helping that plan as a person comes back. How do we help that person and their supervisor communicate with each other, put a plan in place, make sure that the person's needs are met, supported. And I think expectation management is a big part of that. This is what this person is going to need for perhaps this amount of time. Let's figure out what the plan is so that you can bring them back. And so you're not going through, okay, let's get rid of them and bring somebody else entirely new on, that we have to retrain, that we have to reintegrate, that could potentially take more time and money than if you just work with the person who was coming back to begin with.
Yeah. So what was it that caused you to want to get into this work in the first place? Was there a particular incident? Was there something that you saw was lacking? What kind of caused you to want to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. Really kind of stemming back to my own experience. As we were working through my own reintegration back in, I had a ton of things that I could fall back on. I had my counselors there at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I had my counselors back at treatment that I could fall back in on, and I had mental health providers that I could call for help in, as far as my own reintegration was concerned. But as I looked, I would come back to work with all these tools, and my supervisors, try as they might, we still had that disconnect because we didn't know how to have those conversations about how do we get back into the workplace. We couldn't have conversations about what kind of projects I could come back to, what kind of time did I need what kind of time did I need throughout the week, or as my reintegration occurred, for me to get well and kind of go through the process. And so we didn't know what kind of conversations to have. We didn't know what kind of questions to ask, and we didn't know what kind of expectations to lay out. And so while my counselors were there for me, nobody was there for my supervisor. So I got a lot of questions like, can I give you this kind of work, or can I bring you back onto this project, or can we have beer at lunch the next time we go out? And those were questions that I didn't think would be asked, and I didn't know how to anticipate those types of questions. And my supervisors didn't know what I needed. And so there was that big, what I call window of awkwardness for about 4 months before we got normalized again. And that's time that I think we could have been using to start advancing projects and to help me be more productive as I came back to work. And so my aim in reintegration coaching is to shorten that window of awkwardness to get that person back up and running in less amount of time.
I think it's fantastic. I wish we'd have had you around when I was going through my experience. And you know what? If you feel comfortable with this, could you kind of run us through maybe the kind of abbreviated version of what happened? What led you to this point? I mean, I'm in recovery. You're in recovery. What happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my military career, I served for 20 years to retirement, and about the second half of my career, as the responsibility increased, as kind of the expectations increased for me, I started putting a lot of these expectations and standards on myself that were truly unrealistic. I struggled with imposter syndrome. The only reason I'm here is because I'm lucky, or I rode the coattails of others, and anything that I did was really just because I fell into it. I had a lot of fear of failure. And so the way I would mitigate that was I would overwork. I would take pride in being the last car in the parking lot, and, to kind of mask those feelings from myself and deal with those feelings is I would drink. So alcohol was my way to deal with some of those emotions. And so I was isolating a lot from my family, and I was putting up and building what I call the work wall. The last people to figure out that I had some type of problem was going to be the folks at work. So I purposely hid it, and I put a lot of work into hiding my addiction from everybody at work. And I had those thoughts of, man, I really should get help, and but I'll do it after this next exercise. Or I really do need to go talk to somebody, but we have an inspection coming up, so I have to do it after the inspection. And so in my mind, I didn't think my unit could run without me, which is a very prideful way of thinking, but that's just the way my mind worked at the time. I was extremely self-centered in that regard. And in May of 2018, I got the best evaluation that I'd gotten in my career. And it said, one of 7 psychological operations battalion commanders in 1st Special Forces Command. It said one of 19 lieutenant colonels, and it was the top choice to command at the next level. And I thought, man, if my boss only knew who I really was, they wouldn't have given me this evaluation. If they found out that I have this problem and I'm not the person that's here on this paper, then it's all going to come crumbling down. And I used alcohol to shield those feelings rather than going out and talking to somebody. And so that's when my isolation really increased. I was drinking to blackout almost every night. And then there was an incident in August of 2018 where we were at my wife's cousin's wedding. And the last thing I remember that night was having dinner with my family. And the next thing I remember was looking up at the stars. And I thought, man, why am I flat on my back? And why are there paramedics here? I thought, man, somebody severely overreacted and called the paramedics. And this is from a guy laying on his back, getting strapped to a board, looking up at the stars. And as I went to, through that process of getting hospitalized, I went to a local hospital there in Colorado at the time, and a police officer came up to me, and I thought, well, this can't be good. So he started talking to me. He goes, "Do you know what happened?" I said, I have no idea. He said, you tried to take your belt and hang yourself with it, essentially. And so I had a suicide attempt in a blackout that I don't recall. And, when my wife got to the emergency room and saw me for the first time, the first thing I said to her was, "Thank God it's over." And what I meant by that was, it's now out in the open. I mean, I wasn't going to be at work on Monday because of this, and people were going to find out. And so that was the first time I'd given myself permission to put it out there. And I knew I was going to be able to get help. And so something else that was going to be over was me hiding it. And now that this was going to be out there, I could not only get permission, to go get help for myself, but I could start to heal, what was really the core of the issue. And kind of to wrap that story up before I started my recovery journey was when I was looking up at the stars flat on my back coming out of an alcoholic blackout was probably the most at peace I'd been in a really long time. And now looking back at that, I realized that was God giving me my moment of spiritual awakening and clarity to say, okay, this is a turning point for you. I'm giving you a second chance. What are you going to do with it? And my recovery has kind of been a testament to what I've done with that.
Yeah, and so when obviously you went to treatment, sounds like you went to detox and then to inpatient. Was that your route?
That's correct. I got stabilized out there in Colorado, so I was on leave from Fort Bragg at the time, and so I got stabilized out there at Evans Army Community Hospital for a week in the psych ward out there. And then I transitioned over the next couple of weeks back to Fort Bragg, where I got further stabilized. And so that stabilization did consist of detox. They put me on antabuse for my flight back, and until they can get me into an inpatient facility. And that inpatient facility ended up being the Farley Center in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I can't say enough good things about the Farley Center. I firmly believe that they saved my life because I had been through the Army Substance and Alcohol Abuse Program back in 2011. And at that point, I thought, I got this. Alcohol is not a problem for me. And I drank for another 7 years before this incident. But the Farley Center, I think, really helped me open my eyes, get me in touch with my higher power, and really put me into a program of recovery that I could self-sustain. So I really do credit the Farley Center with me being sober now for 6 years.
Well, that's phenomenal, and I think that's so important. And by the way, I'm in Virginia, and I've also heard lots of good things about the Farley Center. We don't have too many patients that go down there just because I'm way up in Northern Virginia, but the folks that do go down there, I know, have a very good experience. And you talk about getting into a program of recovery, and let's back up a little bit here. When I hear patients where I'm at right now, I work in a detox center. When I hear people say, "Oh, I've got this," those are the famous last words. Oh, I could go on for hours talking about that. And I have on this podcast talking about that. As soon as I know that when I hear a patient say that they've got this, I know they're going to have a hard time because people in long-term recovery never say they got this. I'm 12 years sober now, and I don't say that I've got it. I have friends of mine that are 30 plus years, and they never say that they got it. And I think that's why they have got it, because they understand that they don't got it. And maybe talk about that a little bit. Talk about the disease. Talk about how this consumes you, how it really it was almost like malware in a computer. When malware takes over a computer, it just starts making the computer do things that it shouldn't be doing. And to me, that's alcohol. Was that your experience?
Absolutely, Mike. And I called my first round at trying to get sober kind of like the anti-recovery. I was doing exactly everything wrong. The first time I'd gone into recovery, I drank the blackout, and I made a fool of myself at my brother's wedding, and everybody was mad at me. So I went to ASAP because I wanted to get everybody off my back. I didn't go for me. I didn't want to go because I wanted to get sober. I went so everybody would stop being mad at me. And so because I wasn't doing it for me, I'd never got in touch with God as my higher power. I went to a couple sessions and meetings, and I looked around the room and I said, well, you're poor. I still have my job. You don't have your car. You live under a bridge. You got divorced. I am nothing at all like any of these people. And it was a super arrogant way to approach recovery. So I didn't have humility. I didn't have a higher power. And my mindset was, well, everything I've gotten to this point was because of me. I've been successful because of me. And so why can't I lick this alcohol habit that I have? And I'm going to show everybody I'm not going to drink until I PCS back to Fort Bragg, because I was at Fort Leavenworth at the time. And not in jail, but just stationed there. And so I said,
it's an important distinction, right?
It's an important distinction, yeah. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to show everybody I'm not going to drink until I get out of this ASAP program and show that I can stop whenever I want. And so I went 3 months without drinking. So I was dry, but I was not sober by any stretch, because I didn't have a program I was working. I wasn't talking to anybody else about it. I was white knuckling it and just doing it to show people that I could do it. And it was a very self-centered reason to get through my recovery. And so as soon as we left Fort Leavenworth and went back to Fort Bragg, I started drinking again, because, hey, I could go 3 months without drinking and I could stop whenever I wanted. And that continued that progression of the disease. And it was, the more I drank, the more self-centered I got, the more isolated I got, the more fearful I got, which meant the more I drank. And that cycle repeated itself until I was drinking the blackout every night. And I was afraid of almost everything that would happen. I was afraid that people were going to find out I was drinking. To the extent I was afraid people were going to find out that I really wasn't this person that I thought that I portrayed myself to be. And it was just this mental boxing match I was having with myself on a daily basis. And the only way I could make it go away was by drinking. And it never occurred to me that I could make it go away by being sober and being in touch with a higher power.
And so for those that are listening, I think that because you've used this term a couple of times, and I think it's important for people to understand, because I know people that I work with right now, and I was guilty of this as well. People come in and say, hey, I was sober for a week. I was sober for 2 weeks, and then I drank again. There's a distinction between not using and being sober. And I've talked about that on this podcast before, but when I say that to you, there's a difference between not drinking and drugging and being sober. What is the difference between the two for somebody that might be listening?
Yeah, for me, there's a pretty big distinction. Not drinking is eliminating the alcohol, from my life. However, I still don't have the tools for my fear of failure, my isolation, the fear that I deal with, the relationships that I have. There's nothing that's replacing the alcohol. And in my mind, I can stop drinking all day, but if I'm not working a program of recovery that's centered around spirituality, then I'm going to start to slip right back into where I was back in 2011, which is I'm not drinking, but I'm still miserable, and I'm still irritable, and I'm still discontented, and I'm still frustrated, and I'm still having all these negative feelings. I couldn't even let myself feel good at the time. Even when I felt good, I still felt guilty and shameful that I was going to, do something else, or I was taking a look at stuff in my past that I regretted. And I was a hot mess when I wasn't drinking. And, even though alcohol wasn't part of the equation, I still wasn't sober because I wasn't taking the steps to deal with what was really at the root of my alcoholism, which was me. And so at the end of the day, I wasn't treating my core problem. I just wasn't drinking. And so I read the book, Beautiful Boy, here recently. And one of my favorite quotes out of that book is, alcohol wasn't the problem. Alcohol was how I dealt with the problem. And so once I eliminated alcohol, the problem still existed. And again, that problem was my own mental health, spiritual health, and the way I would deal with issues, or frankly, good things that would happen in my life. I would see them in a negative light, and I would still tear things down around me, even though I wasn't drinking, because I had no program of recovery.
Yeah, very, very well said. And this is, and if you're an employer and you have somebody that's going through this and they're coming back from treatment, this is important stuff to know. So tell us a bit about your business. So obviously you left the Army, You decided to do this. Now, but did you have these thoughts at the time, or what was the impetus to you starting this business of yours?
Yeah, great question, Mike. And it wasn't until March that I started taking a look at this, March of this year. I went to the Texas Coaches Coalition retreat here in New Braunfels, Texas. And a gentleman asked me, what kind of coaching do you do? I said, well, I'm a leadership coach. He said, come on, man, everybody's a leadership coach. And I said, you know what, you're right. And so he kind of took me under his wing a little bit. And he walked me through, who do you want to work with? Who do you want to make a difference with? And at first I said, I'd like to coach people just like me. And as he took me through this process, he said, well, do people just like you need the coaching or need the resources that you provide? And the more we talked about it, the more he helped me realize that people who were just like me have a ton of resources already from, the things that I've already mentioned before, therapists and resources from work and those types of things. And he helped me realize, well, who else is in that orbit? And I said, well, the people at work are in that orbit. And that's when it clicked, that the people at work, a lot of the time, don't have the same level of resources that the person coming back in does. And so that light bulb moment for me was, how can I provide something that helps the person being reintegrated, but then also helps the person on the other side of that relationship, whether that person is the supervisor, the colleague, or the individual. And how do we create that environment that everybody can help participate in the reintegration, not just the person coming back? And so, back to our conversation, Mike, when somebody receives somebody back in and they've never had to deal with addiction or alcoholism or mental health because they don't have family members or friends that have gone through that, they're starting at square one, and that person shows up to work and says, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to go. That person has got to, a lot of the time, just start from scratch and figure out how to bring this person back in. And those conversations aren't had until maybe 2-3 weeks later. And what reintegration coaching does is it not only facilitates those conversations, but it helps the supervisor have a set of expectations that may have not been addressed, and the supervisor may have not even known existed before this person has come back into work. So there's a little bit of an education aspect of it. There's a lot of conversations that center around this type of coaching. And there's a lot of, okay, this is the situation. What do we need to do moving forward in order to bring this person back in a productive and supported manner?
Yeah, I like that. Now, you have a business. Now, was that difficult to set up? And how do you go about getting your clientele? And if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what is it that they could expect? How does this work? I mean, so if you come into my organization, what is it that you're going to be doing for us?
Right. Yeah. So the first thing we would do is we would make an assessment, essentially. How much time and how much effort have you already put into doing something like this? So some companies, for example, I met a great organization in San Antonio called Haven for Hope, and they're a nonprofit that employs a lot of folks who are going through recovery, and so they've got a lot of experience with bringing people back in from their initial recovery and people who are returning back in from subsequent treatment. And so they've already got something that's somewhat of a structure in place that can help with something like this. And so the first thing that we would do is we would make an assessment. How prepared are you to bring this person back in? Where is this person in their treatment cycle? Have they just left and will be back in 8 weeks? Or have they been back for 2 or 3 weeks already and the organization is just at a loss to how do we make this work? Another aspect of it too is there's a lot of federal regulation between the American with Disabilities Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, that companies have to adhere to when bringing somebody back into their organization. And so we take a look, are you subject to these federal regulations? How is the employee assistance program set up through HR if an HR program exists? What are some of the gaps in that EAP that we can perhaps help with as a person reintegrates? And so we really want to take a look at where are you as an organization and where is the person as a reintegrated individual when they start coming back or have they already come back into the organization. And so we start to take a look at what are those things that are missing. And some of the things that we'll take a look at are what are the expectations for this person to come back into the workplace, and what are some of the expectations that the organization may have for this person to come back in. And so we take a look at all of those things from the initial assessment. Something we'll take a look at subsequently as well is what are some of the resources that are already in place, and then we start to put that integration plan together based on what are the gaps, what are the resources available, and what are the resources that aren't available for the organization, and how do we start to bring those in to the organization as well. And then once we've determined where are we and where do we need to go, we start to put that integration plan in that really outlines some of the things that we found in the assessment. How are we going to get from here to where we need to go? And some of those things may include, what kind of communication plan needs to be in place, what kind of mentorship plan needs to be in place for both the supervisor and the reintegrated individual. And the other thing is the timeline. How long do you think this is going to take to get in place? The next thing then is vigilance. How do we make sure that we're meeting all of our milestones? How do we make sure that as the person goes through their journey and there's a hiccup, maybe something goes quicker, maybe something goes slower than intended, how do we adjust that plan? And so we really want to be vigilant as the plan is carried out and move forward. And then the last thing is equilibrium. How do we make sure that everything continues to be aligned even after I'm gone? Even after the reintegration coaching is complete, how do we make sure that both the reintegrated individual is successful along with the team that they're a part of? And if somebody else in that organization happens to raise some of those same red flags, how do we make sure that those team members and those supervisors are prepared to either bring in a reintegration coaching again or have some of those tools in place to be able to bring that person back in at a later date? And so it's called the DRIVE model. We have discovery at the front, which is that assessment. We have resources, which is we take a look at what's in place and what's needed. We have the integration plan itself that we take a look at and put in place with a timeline. I think it's important to have that time component of the plan in place. Then we have vigilance, where we take a look at how do these things start to play out, and we keep our eye out for any red flags or any successes or opportunities that we have along the way. And then equilibrium is that last thing. How do we make sure that this is sustainable over time by making sure things are aligned and in balance as a person goes through this process, not only for the integrated individual, but for that reintegrated individual team. And so we use that DRIVE model to make sure that people are successful as they get reintegrated.
So let me ask you this, because I think that this is an outstanding program. And again, I think every organization, certainly the organizations, the Navy, the police department I was in, the FBI for sure, they would benefit greatly from this. But I also know, and you know, that many organizations, particularly federal organizations, are very protective about the programs they have in place. Because you mentioned EAP. And if those of you that are listening, if you're out in the private sector, you may have you may not have anything similar to EAP, which is employee assistance programs. You may have nothing, or you may have a program that goes by a different title, and they have very different resources and capabilities. But I do know that organizations like the military and the federal law enforcement agencies can be a bit protective about the systems, whether they're run well or run poorly. I can see a lot of resistance to allowing someone to come in and have this sort of a program. Has that been your experience, or what kind of reception are you getting from organizations that you're approaching?
Yeah, so Mike, I am so early in this development model that I've not yet had those types of conversations with either federal or local law enforcement or military. I am looking to expand it out to those types of organizations, but I've not had those conversations yet, just because I'm so early in the development of the program. Right now, most of the folks that I've been in talks with are nonprofits and other types of organizations.
Yeah. Oh, and I can imagine that's where it would all start. And I'm not going to make this a political discussion by any means. That would be very, very, very bad on a recovery podcast. But I will say this, that no matter where people are in the political spectrum, I'm hoping that someone in government comes in and really allows, let me see how I can structure this, allowing outside entities like what you're doing to come in and help in federal agencies to do this kind of work, because I think it's important. And I think that when it comes to recovery, and maybe get your thoughts on this. I've been sober long enough now, and I've been working in this industry long enough now that I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. I've experienced it on a personal level, and being the recipient of various programs. And then now I'm in the industry on the civilian side. And I see what's out there when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare, when it comes to the resources that are available, treatment modalities, treatment options, different various programs, how those programs are presented to patients. And I've begun to really develop my own personal opinions about the effectiveness, efficacy of all of these different programs. And here's one thing that I have thought about. And again, I'll just get your thoughts on this, Eric. It all started with me when I went back to school, got my current master, this latest master's degree on addiction and co-occurring disorders. I was surprised, and my degree is from a very, pretty reputable school when it comes to addiction. And I was surprised at how little the most effective programs are, in my opinion, 12-step programs are in recovery, and how little they were emphasized. And then later, when I got into the field, after I graduated and started working in the field, how little emphasis this is. Also, how few people are actually in recovery that are in this field. And then, finally, the thing that surprised me the most was because when you look at the long-term recovery rates for people, it's a pretty low number. People like yourself, like me, that get into long-term recovery, it's actually a pretty small number of people that get into long-term recovery. But there was never, at least in my experience, the academic experience, not a lot of talk of, okay, well, if we have this low of a recovery rate, let's really look at what would work better. There's not been any revolutionary sort of concepts that have developed over the last maybe 70 plus years, 80 years of, like, are there different models to come up with this? And so you would think the type of work that you're doing is something that everybody would be talking about in the workplace. But what I have found is no one's talking about the type of work that you're talking about. And furthermore, people aren't really focused on, well, how can we improve recovery rates? Now, the work that you're doing is moving towards that end, which is fantastic. But I mean, are you running into that? Are you running into, or are you surprised, I guess I should say, at how little thought is given to how can we do business better? I know that's a very, very long question, a lot of moving parts to it. But I guess maybe just kind of start with, because what you're doing is kind of out of the box thinking. I guess that's what it comes down to. Is I'm shocked at how little out of the box thinking there is when it comes to recovery. Now, what you're doing were you surprised by that?
I was, Mike. When I first had this idea with the help of a fellow coach, I said, okay, cool. Well, let me find out who else is doing this so that I can start kind of bouncing ideas off of them, seeing what kind of models they're using, and just see what the niche looks like. And I found one other reintegration coach in the world, and she lives in Switzerland. And she deals exclusively with mental health. And so she's kind of been my only mentor throughout this process when it comes to the reintegration coaching. And I think the twist on reintegration coaching is that the focus isn't the reintegrated individual, because that person already has a number of resources. The focus for reintegration coaching is that individual's boss and team. And in taking a look at this, as I started to do my research on this model, is just how much is provided to the person that's going to be supervising this individual. Because what we don't want is somebody comes back to work, and I think my assumption is that we'll see one of two things. the first one is the person who was like me, who said, I'm going to prove that I belong here. And I'm going to prove that, I'm not a piece of garbage that had to go to treatment. And so I'm going to work my butt off, and I was working 12 hours a day before. Now I'm going to work 14 hours a day to show that I really do belong here. And what that person would need is a boss to say, hey man, let's slow your roll. Let's make sure you're getting the treatment that you need, but still have you be a valuable member, part of the team. You don't have to overwork yourself like you were before in order to do this. And even if they're coming back to the same boss who thought, man, this person working 12 hours a day is really producing for me. Now the boss can understand and see, okay, maybe that wasn't the healthiest way to go when it came to this person before. Now let me be a part of the solution, rather than, just taking a look at this person who's producing a lot of work and high quality work for me, and just kind of let that go. And now I know the kinds of questions I should be asking. I now know some of the red flags that this is going to raise if somebody is working that much. And maybe not just see it as, this is a great hardworking individual, but let me dig a little bit deeper and figure out what's really going on. And so that's where the uniqueness of reintegration coaching really comes in, is that it's for the boss's awareness and the boss's ability to reintegrate. Because sometimes that boss just may not know what's going on, and they may think to themselves, man, I'm supposed to be this person's supervisor, but I don't know any better than that person how to bring them back in and how to give them work and how to prevent or help prevent some of the same conditions that drove them into recovery, or into that alcohol use, or some of the mental health issues that they were having. And so we want the boss to be better prepared for that individual to come back. And just a quick note on the long-term piece, when I went to treatment back in 2011, I went through and then I left Fort Leavenworth, and I never heard back from anybody about my treatment or my recovery from that point forward. I didn't tell anybody. And so I wanted to hide it because I wanted to keep drinking. That was really my ultimate goal. Let me get everybody off my back. Let me move. And then when I get to my new place, nobody else is going to know, and I'm going to go right back into it. And so that was a failing on my part, because I didn't want anybody else to stop me from drinking. And so I think there's a fine line there in the long term, especially in places like the military where we move around a lot. Nobody wants to violate HIPAA, so nobody's going to call my commander when I get to my new unit and say, hey, this guy just went through treatment. And I'm certainly not going to tell them if I don't want to stay sober, if I want to continue to drink. And so I think long term, in my experience, it really fell on me to make sure I maintain my long-term sobriety. And if I don't want to do it, and if I don't want to stay sober, or if I don't know how to stay sober, that's not going to work very well for me. And so I think you're right. Long-term, it's tough, because in organizations where we move around a lot, it falls on that individual, and it's tough to keep up with if you're in the same mindset I was in. Yeah,
it's true. At the end of the day, recovery is about you. You either want it or not. We have a saying in recovery, and that is that recovery is not for those that need it. It's for those that want it. And if you don't want to be sober, and if you're listening to me right now, if you're listening to Eric and myself, and you are not ready to get sober, then the fact is you're not going to get sober. You have to be ready for it. And it has to be your total focus, because it has to be your number one priority in your life, has to be your sobriety. Now, what we're talking about are the resources that you can get from your employer in order to do that. And I know in my case, my employer, if you could have taken every fork in the road and gone the right way and the wrong way, they went the wrong way every single time. And I do believe that my higher power brought me here today to do this in order to really emphasize the fact that that's not how it should be done. I, through some miracle, was able to get sober, and I'm here today as a result of that. But it wasn't because my organization was helping me. They actually did a lot to hurt. And that was what motivated me to do what I'm doing here today. And I think that, you talked about how you were really working hard because you wanted to show people that, look, I can do this. And that was a motivator for me too. It almost got to the point to where, not only did I want to live and not die, because like you, if I hadn't gotten sober, I wouldn't be alive today. And obviously I wanted that, and I wanted a quality of life, but then there was a pride element to do. I wanted to show people that, oh, you didn't think I was going to make it? Well, I'll show you. I'm going to you think I can't get sober? Well, screw you. I'm going to get sober. And, and I think that's an important thing too. And by the way, I think that that's an important part of what you do too, is because I think as an employer, each one of your employees is different. They're different. Everybody's motivated in their own way. We all have our motivations. And I think that in recovery, and you can help as an employer to encourage people, is that find out what is it that motivates this individual, and kind of play to that. And, find a way to utilize whatever comes naturally to them motivation-wise to help them in their recovery. For me, I can tell you this. It became, and you may be wired this way too, Eric, it's important to me that if you are going to count on me, I don't want to let you down. And so part of why I do this podcast, part of why I lead some of the meetings that I lead, the teaching, a lot of the work that I do outside of here, even running for public office the way I'm doing it now, I'm very open about my recovery. And in a way that kind of helps me stay sober, because I now know I don't have any choice but to be sober, because I'm now that guy. Right. And I don't want to be that guy that people look at and go, hey, did you hear about him? Did you hear what happened to him? And that motivates you. Now, that may not motivate the next person, but it did motivate me. But every person's going to have that touch point that's important to them, and then utilize that to get well. But I think as an employer, that's one of the things is, what is it about your employee that makes them tick? How do they think? And then utilizing that to help them in the long run. I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, and it was kind of the same for me. I found that the more I talked about it and the more I became vulnerable, the more I could help other people with my recovery. It took a lot of energy for me to hide it. And when it was finally out in the open and I was able to talk about it, it was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And, I slept better, and my mental health was a lot better because it was now out in the open. And I tell this anecdote a little bit. It's, before I went into my own treatment, I would refer soldiers all the time to the resources there at Fort Bragg as a commander. And I would say, if you're having a problem with alcohol, you need to go here. Okay, you got a DUI, you need to go to this program to get sober. And so it's not because I didn't know that the resources were out there. I had referred soldiers to those same resources. It was that I was unwilling to get sober because I was afraid. I was isolated, I was prideful, and I was afraid to go do those things. And, the soldiers that I would send out there, who knows if they would ever get sober. And I would tell people all the time, hey, if you're having a problem with drinking, you should go do these things. And I don't think we ever saw any significant number of individuals go and take advantage of those resources. But when I came back from treatment and I talked to my unit, 265 people, and I told them exactly what had happened, how I felt throughout this process, its effect that it had on me and my family and all my other relationships. The following week, I had, our sergeant major come up to me, my number 2 guy. He said, after you gave that talk to the unit, 4 of our soldiers went to their first sergeant and asked if they could go get help. They said, I've got the exact same thing that Lieutenant Colonel Kreitz has, and I think I need to go get help. And I realized at that moment that if I want other people to be vulnerable, I have to be vulnerable with them first. And that works with my kids. That works with, talking to other people who potentially may be alcoholics or addicts or have mental health issues. That if I open up to them and I want to start that conversation with them, I have to be vulnerable first. And I think that's a big, big thing that I realized as a supervisor after my recovery, is that if I want to have honest conversations with people about alcoholism and addiction and getting treatment for those things, I have to share my story first and be vulnerable with them first if I want them to open up and be vulnerable with me. I think that's the key. And that's part of what reintegration coaching brings too, is how can we have those types of conversations with people so that people feel safe talking, because they know, okay, other people are going to talk to me about what they are struggling with. I can now freely talk to them about what I'm struggling with. And it's not until we have those types of conversations that we can really start to get effective reintegration coaching going and effective recovery, with the employer being a key part of that. And so I think that vulnerability is key. And if we're supervisors and we want people to take advantage of these resources and go into treatment, we have to be vulnerable with them first.
Absolutely. And that's the key to recovery. I mean, after all, that's, and we're taught that in recovery, is that first we share our story, and then the person can relate to us, and then we go from there and make it clear that, if you want what we have, and look at our lives have not gotten 100% better. They've gotten 1,000% better, but there is a path, there is a way to do that. And if you're ready and you're willing, you can do that. You can have this if you're willing to follow certain suggestions, and that's the key to it. And I'm just so happy to see that there's someone out there sort of expanding this, because we have been so focused on the individual that's suffering from the addiction, but as we go further along in time, and particularly with the fentanyl crisis, which I'm up close and personal with every single day, particularly at the hospital, it's going to get worse. There's no shortage of work to be done in this field. And we are going to, if we are going to make even a dent in this crisis that we have, we're going to have everybody on board. And it can't be isolated to just those that are in the recovery community. It has to be in families. It has to be employers. It has to be people in the community. It has to be our leaders. If we don't, we're never going to make a dent in this. And so I like that this is a very multifaceted approach to dealing with this issue. And this is great work that you're doing. I really want to thank you for doing this.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mike. And, one last thought that I had was somebody told me early in recovery that the opposite of addiction isn't necessarily sobriety, it's connection. And, we've had a lot of events, in the last couple of years from COVID to the rise in social media that really affects our connectedness with other people. And, one person joked with me and said, I have 1,000 friends on Facebook, but I can't get anybody to watch my cat. And it's, we miss that connection a lot of the time. And part of what reintegration coaching aims to do is to strengthen those workplace connections between, the supervisor and the reintegrated individual, but then also with the supervisor and the rest of the team. And, we do introduce some aspects of group coaching in there, and how do we strengthen the relationships amongst everybody in the workplace so we have a better workplace, not just a better relationship between the reintegrated individual and the supervisor, but how do we have a better sense of connection with everybody else in our workspace? And then that way we can really start to take a look at, okay, who do we need to check up on? Who seems to be falling off a little bit? Who's doing really, really well, so that we can reinforce that and celebrate that. And I think connection is really at the core moving forward of what we need to take a look at, because we do have polarizing things going on in the world, and that tears down our connections, and so we got to figure out new ways to rebuild some of those connections.
Yeah, very well said. Well, Eric, tell us, how can we get hold of you? If somebody wants to reach out to you and connect with the work that you're doing, how are they going to do that?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me and take a look at what we've got going on is through LinkedIn. And so Eric Kreitz is the last part of that URL that you can just type in, or just search up Eric Kreitz on LinkedIn, and I'm typically one of the first couple ones that pop up. No website yet at this point, so LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, well, folks, it's Eric Kreitz, and that's Kreitz, and Renovium Leadership Coaching, again, on LinkedIn. And Eric, I just want to commend you so much on the work that you're doing. It's phenomenal. We need fighters in the field for this and leaders in the field for this, and that's certainly you. So thanks again for doing this, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I think you're doing great work as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Again, guys, check out Eric Kreitz, Renovium Leadership Coaching. And guys, there's a way that we can get sober. You can do it. For those that are struggling, struggling for many years, just like I did, like Eric did, as you heard in his story, it can get better. It does. But you got to want it, You got to want it, number one, and then be willing to utilize the resources you have, and listen to what people that tell you that these people that have gotten well, and many, many, many people get well. But what you'll find, I'm telling you, what you'll find is that they all tend to do sort of the same things in order to get well. But you can do it because recovery is possible. We know that. And you guys take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time. Again, this is Mike Van Meter, Recovery is Possible, and we will see you all soon.